as much as we welcome the end to free movement, we are slightly concerned that the rest of the proposals, as we haven't actually heard them officially yet, is likely. It seems that it will be sending a wrong message to the 4 million people in this country who are either looking for work or want more work. It seems that as much as there's a intention to close the gap for low-skilled workers, it seems that there's also going to be an expansion of people who can come in via high-skilled and medium-skilled routes.
Right. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that, is there? I mean, who are these 4 million people you speak of?
Well, they are people in this country who are looking for work and want more work. And
no, but that's a very catch-all phrase. Do you mean that they're unemployed, or do you mean that they want different jobs?
Some are working, but actually want more hours that they cannot get.
Right.
And basically, the system currently allows businesses to go abroad for obviously labour at all skill levels and all wage levels. This new system will essentially, it seems to be, is going to remove any limits on the number of workers that can be brought in from abroad into high-skilled and medium-skilled work, which will enable businesses to continue ignoring the UK resident labour market in terms of job opportunities and training. And we think this is potentially going to be very problematic.
But we see adverts all the time, certainly in this part of the world, for bus drivers, for train drivers. We hear from the train companies haven't got enough drivers. There are lots of reasonably good sort of mid to high skilled jobs out there that people simply aren't filling.
Well, there's clearly a requirement in any open economy to have a certain number of people coming in to fill certain roles if we cannot source those roles within our own labour market.
Right.
However, there's also businesses have to take a look at themselves and their attitude towards this. Ultimately, if you are able to source an infinite supply of labour from outside that ultimately is going, really this is all about money, let's be honest, and they are basically cheaper, then it diminishes your need to employ resident workers. And there are people clamouring to take spaces, for example, in doctors' places, nurses' places, etc., in this country that have been, the places aren't there because the NHS has been bringing people in from abroad, and it's about time, in our opinion, that they started to expand the opportunities for people who want those jobs in the UK but can't actually get on the training programmes.
We don't have enough nurses in this country, Neil. So why is that? If we have got all these people who want to be nurses, why are they not applying to be nurses?
Well, that's a very good question. And if we look at a few years ago, there were tens of thousands of nurses being turned away from places. This is UK nurses being applicants for nursing training, at the same time as the NHS was increasing the numbers of people it was bringing in to take nursing roles from abroad. And it's simply that's quite simply an issue of money and the ability to do so. The attitude was and has been that we can if we can, instead of having a social and sort of corporate responsibility towards UK workers, that there's been an attitude of finding where we can pay least. And obviously, this is a lack of responsibility towards people in the UK who definitely want these positions and have not been able to access them.
But Neil,
these proposals.
I think that's absolute rubbish. I really do. I don't think that's true at all, Neil. I mean, we've got problems with the nursing population in this country, and they've been here for several decades, right? And if it wasn't for the people who come in from overseas, there probably wouldn't be any nurses at all. So I don't think it's true at all to say.
Well, why is it? Why do we have this? Why is it then, for example, in the UK, that we have about 30% of our doctors are from overseas? Whereas there's no equivalent to that anywhere in continental Europe. I mean, in Holland it's only 3%.
Holland's not comparable.
About 9%.
Yeah, but Holland's not
so
comparable.
Why have we've basically taken an attitude that we're going to source workers from abroad
because we don't have enough of them here.
Every other country has done this, so why have we done it? It's simply it's a short-termist attitude.
Well, I don't think it is. I think it's because people in this country don't want to do those jobs for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Well, but they do. And there's been reports on this consistently by various organisations.
Like who?
Well, there was a report by a nurse for a Royal Nursing.
Are you sure about this
council report? Yeah, back in 2015,
right,
that looked at this and actually found that 30-odd thousand nursing places were being applied for by UK-born people that were not actually being filled because basically in the same year the NHS was bringing in tens of thousands of people from outside.
Well, where are these nurses now, though? Now that there are plenty of vacancies, because the NHS is
the
constantly
vacancies are only going to start emerging now. There's no.
Well, no, they've had vacancies. Everybody knows, Neil, that knows anything about the way the NHS operates, is that they have to use agency workers constantly because they don't have enough nurses, and they pay through the nose for the agency workers, which makes absolutely no sense financially. But the reason they do it is because they simply do not have enough nurses. If you are a British woman or a British man who wants to be a nurse in a hospital right now, you will have no trouble getting a job.
Right, there are obviously structural and administrative issues within the NHS that I'm not qualified to comment on. What we can say for a fact is that there would clearly be, if the spaces are expanded to get onto the training programs, which is now actually, the government earlier this year, for example, announced it's going to expand the number of doctors' places for training by 4,500 in the next few years. Now, they've done this in response to the fact, in response to the realisation that there will be demand for this, there has been demand for this, and they are simply now realised that they cannot be reliant constantly upon bringing people in from abroad. However, what these proposals are actually suggesting is possibly that they will be able to continue bringing people in in unlimited numbers, and actually they won't need to look to the UK labour market. So, the fact is that in this country we were never historically dependent upon foreign labour. This is a fairly new phenomenon. We've always had some influx of foreign labour for obvious reasons, like most open economies. But the scale of it in recent years is phenomenal. Let's remember that 3/4 of the public want to see significant reductions in immigration, and our population is currently growing at about 1 million every 3 years. So basically, we're getting a city the size of Birmingham added to our population every 3 years.
Well, hang on. I don't think it's not true, Neil, to say that
in a small country that's one of the most densely populated in Europe.
To say that 3/4 of people want a significant reduction in immigration isn't true. What are you basing that on?
Well, there was a Channel 4 Delta poll survey conducted in June that found that exact finding.
It does depend on the question. I don't think there's any doubt that the immigration is a massive problem in this country and has been ever since, as I said earlier, the Tony Blair government brought in new changes to the way that they imported people into this country. However, we're talking supposedly today not about the overall and the overarching situation. I mean, that's why people voted in a large way to leave the European Union. But what we're talking about here is Sajid Javid's plans, which should reduce what is rather an open border into a much more closed border. I'd have thought you'd be a lot happier about this, Neil.
We're very happy to see, if these proposals are followed through and there is an enter free movement, then we welcome that, as I've already said. However, we are concerned that that if there are safeguards removed for UK workers, if the cap is removed on high skilled and workers, this idea of expanding to allow employers to bring in medium-skilled workers, which basically is the equivalent of anyone with a sort of A-level or thereabouts and above, can basically get sponsored to come to the UK to work. We feel this is not good for the millions of people in this country who actually are looking for work and looking for opportunities. And there is no historical precedent for this situation. This is something that has emerged, as you say, since the Blair years. And it was an open door policy to bring people in. And now business and private sector and public sector have become hooked on foreign labour as an antidote, rather than actually considering structural deficiencies in our labour market and addressing those by better wages, better conditions, and training up the UK workforce and providing them work opportunities.
But Neil, I think one of the problems when the two sides of this argument, lock horns, is that people on your side will say there's an army of 4 million people ready and willing to do these jobs, and the other side says there is no army of UK workers waiting to do these jobs. They would have these jobs if they were willing to do them. And I think you just said that the structural problems with wages, and I think that's probably nearer the truth, isn't it? That actually there isn't an army willing to do these jobs for these prices. There is an army of people willing to do jobs for higher wages. Well,
but surely, what is the purpose of an immigration policy? Surely is to be to the benefit of the country, of this country. That should be our government's sole priority. It's not there to basically aim towards the lowest common denominator of salary for whoever's willing to take the lowest wages. We basically find ourselves regressing to sort of Victorian England, and if we really think that that's the way forward,
where'd you get that from?
Civilized society. Well, the idea of I personally believe in the idea of a fair day's pay for a fair day's work.
Right.
And basically, your argument there was simply that it's okay for business to pay as low as it possibly can.
No, it's not. That's why we have the minimum wage, though, Neil.
I don't agree with that, and I think
it doesn't matter whether you agree with it or not. We have a minimum wage in this country, Neil. You can't pay less than that. It's illegal.
Well, that's true.
So therefore, we do have a living wage, and we have a wage which is sustainable. 28.73 million UK nationals work in the UK. 2.29 million EU nationals work in the UK. I don't think that's a bad sort of measure at all. I think as a proportion, that's pretty small.
Well, the fact is, it's significantly higher than it historically was.
It's actually 28,000 fewer than it was a year before.
There's a number of factors in that. Firstly, there are still more EU citizens coming to the UK to work than leaving. I mean, there were 90,000.
Well, according to these statistics, which is from the Office of National Statistics, 28,000 fewer EU nationals working in this country this year than last year. So you're wrong.
Well, no, I'm talking about an influx of EU citizens into the UK, looking for work, intending to obtain work. So, we're clearly referring to different data sets. But the fact is that the economic argument here is one part of a bigger discussion. Okay, let's look at this from the perspective of what the public want. Let's look at this from the perspective of, do we really want to continue concreting over our countryside simply to house people who are coming into work, or do we actually want to reorient our economy and our labour market so that we are giving opportunities to UK residents? And
There's loads of opportunities, though. I mean, you and I are just going to have to differ about this, Neil, because there are plenty of opportunities, and I've just come back from a trip to Edinburgh, and if you think Britain is being concreted over, you want to take a trip on the train up the east coastline where you see nothing but green fields. Nothing.
Yeah, I've taken that journey many times, and
okay.
Which
bit of it's been concreted over?
I fear for the future of our beautiful green countryside, considering that we have a population projection. ONS estimated that's our population is going to increase by somewhere around 10 million in the next 25 years or so. Which basically, if you want
do you want to have to stop people having children now?
If you want to house those people, this is largely due to immigration. Remember?
So, no, it's not actually. Absolute rubbish. That is rubbish.
Population growth.
Population growth comes and goes, and it depends on how many children people have. And by and large, the more people you have who have children, and that is people who are from this country, living in this country, and have done for generations, they'll be having a lot more children than the immigrants will.
Let me refer you to the ONS statistics that you quite happily referred to yourself earlier.
Please do. It'd be the first time you come out with any figures that make any sense.
It's very clear from ONS data, and it comes out every quarter. Feel free to look at it. Migration is contributing somewhere around 2/3 to 3/4 of our population increase on an annual basis, and has been for many, many years.
What's the number?
Well, we've got a population growth of about just under 400,000 on the last statistics, of which 270,000 were non-UK nationals. So there's your figure.
So that's about half
happening. So this is it's nearer 2/3. And so we can safely say, and this is not disputed by anybody, that immigration is the primary contributor to our population growth.
Do you think we should have any immigration, Neil?
We need immigration, but we need immigration A, sustainably, and B, into.
So what would be your immigration? What would be your immigration policy then?
Well, we support the government's professed intention to reduce immigration into the tens of net migration to the tens of thousands. We feel that the current rate of population growth in this country, which is largely driven by migration, is too high and completely unsustainable. And we think that there needs to be robust measures to encourage businesses to look to the UK labour market before having to source workers from abroad. This is phenomenon.
That's a wish more than a policy, though. What would you actually do if you were sitting in front of Sajid Javid and telling him precisely what you think he should do? What would you say to him?
Well, if you restrict the ability of companies to bring labour in from abroad, then necessarily you do encourage them to invest in the UK.
Well, when you say restrict, how would you do that?
UK productivity.
But how would you restrict it?
that requires much stricter regulation of the criteria upon which people can enter the UK.
Well, like what, though? You have to be more specific.
Migration. Well, I mean, I can get into the technical details of the visa system, but I'm not sure your listeners.
Well, I just want you to tell me how easy or difficult it would be for if you're telling me a company won't be able to hire, like for example, Talk Radio can't hire anyone from Poland, or they can't hire anyone from Poland unless they've got a doctorate in something or other. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, what we would say is we would ensure that there was a rigorous and robust attempt, firstly, to source those the relevant workers that you require in the UK labour market.
So you would have
and potentially even adjusting the salary on offer to achieve that.
So you'd basically say to companies, you can't hire anyone from abroad unless you've exhausted every possibility of hiring somebody here.
Well, we certainly make it a much more stringent set of criteria to find.
And this is the problem, of course, where you will come up against businesses retaliating and saying, it doesn't make sense for us to say we'll pay, a British worker twice what we would pay a European worker, because they've got to be answerable to their shareholders, and they will see that doesn't make sense. And I completely understand your point, Neil, that we do have, if we're going to stick, with these immigration policies, we do have to wean ourselves off the cheap European labour. But how you do that in a practical sense, when you're dealing with businesses that aren't answerable to politicians, they can do whatever they want in many ways, that's very difficult. And when you start tinkering with the way that businesses are run, on top of having a minimum wage, it's really hard. And obviously that's before you get into the tier 2 visas and the nurses and doctors and the more skilled workers.
Businesses function perfectly well in the UK prior to the massive opening of the borders and a huge influx of migrants in the last 20 years, and they will be perfectly capable of adjusting. Our businesses are managed by competent, capable people. They simply need to unhook themselves from this reliance upon cheap labour as an antidote to everything. Let's remember that UK productivity has basically stagnated for over the last for 10 years. And in large part, this is due to the fact that business hasn't needed to invest. It has allowed itself to become dependent upon cheap labour as an alternative to investing in its own upskilling its UK workforce, bringing in UK workers, or mechanising and automation.
I really don't recognise your vision of Britain at all, Neil. I absolutely don't recognise it.